Hey, what's up, guys? It's me, the Spiritual Philanthropist. So we're going to go through this debate, and hopefully we'll be able to get to the bottom of this. So if you haven't seen my most recent video, I suggest that you take a look at the one right before this that I did, because you'll see that I really start going after this. What's happening here, and really start to scrutinize it. And hopefully it will make some sense to you. But there's a lot of things that Wesley said that, of course, is pertinent, does make sense. I respect his background, but he did make some mistakes here. And you know, uh, Billy Carson, the way that they dealt with this, I thought was kind of ninja-like. They seem to have put him here on the spot without his knowledge of what he was going to get into. And you can look and see that he was sick. If you look at his video, he talks about him, how sick he was, and I believe that he actually was sick. I do believe something was wrong there. So, without further ado, as they say, let's move into the stuff, and let's check out this debate here. Okay, so let's see what happens here.
To come to your conclusions. Even with Jesus, I'm not personally even waiting on that he has to come back to. I already know I'm, like I said, that strength of God and consciousness is already, I can tap into that right now. So you don't have to wait for him to come back. For those that believe he does, to actually have that like next level of what that's supposed to mean. But Wes, go ahead on for what Billy was talking about, I think with a book in the Harvard Museum, and I heard something about Jesus's wife, which that's, yeah.
Yeah, well, first let me say I think it's really cool to not just be in the room proverbially with you, Billy, but be able to interact with you. Because I wish I could be there in person. Unfortunately, Toronto, Canada, is a long way away from Florida. It's a little bit of a jaunt. But I really appreciate the fact that you seem to have investigated to a certain degree some of these facts. Do you mind if I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
When you say the Sinai Bible, what are you referring to specifically?
It's the biblical text that was written. It made it into you can actually look it up on Amazon. It's a Bible called, I have a version at home. It's called the Sinai Bible, right? From Mount Sinai. I'm assuming that's the mountain that they're referencing there. But they put together their own version of the biblical text prior to the King James Version being put out.
Sure. So when you refer to the Sinai Bible, would you be referring to Codex Sinaiticus? Like the codex that comes... Okay. That's why I was trying to get some clarification. Because, so you can actually go and see... Codex Sinaiticus is at the British Library. So you can go and see it. It's on display. And the British Library has actually digitized the entire manuscript. So I work with manuscripts in my linguistic work. I'm an expert on early Christian scribal culture, and particularly in Greek and Coptic manuscripts. I actually have a facsimile. So I have a photocopy that was done by the British Library of Codex Sinaiticus that I work with in my office. So I have it here. And the only reason I asked for clarification is because I want to make sure Sinaiticus in particular is just a Greek, it's a 4th century Greek manuscript. Mm-hmm. It comes from approximately between 325 and 350 AD. And its text of the Gospels reads almost identical to the modern Greek text that we develop translations from. So my curiosity is just simply in kind of exploring, when you say that it denies the crucifixion or that the crucifixion isn't there, I mean, I can go on right now, Codex Sinaiticus, and I can look up the end of, say, Matthew 27, mm-hmm. where it has Jesus being crucified. And that's in Codex Sinaiticus, or, the John 19, or any of the other ones. So I think my confusion is that it doesn't read any differently. So actually, are you able to pull up a website with the viewers or
looking
listeners or
I'm
whatever be
looking
able to
for
see
it
that?
right now to make sure I have
What
the right
what
the version that I'm looking at.
while he's pulling that up too, like I keep saying to all the people that aren't scientists traveling the world and linguists, I don't even know how to pronounce it the right way, like
Yeah,
me.
linguists.
What is
Yeah,
cyanide? I keep thinking of cyanide, like the cyanide Bible. So is
right.
that like a version? So from my own knowledge that I know, like when I really studied all this, what I thought was interesting about the Bible was how many like different eyewitness. I studied C.S. Lewis back in the day, how many different eyewitnesses and stuff there were. And they went on purpose to mention so many other names that they were able to like
Hmm.
cross-reference throughout history and throughout those times from my understanding. And those were different things that I always thought were kind of interesting that I felt was a good concept of proof. And then I want Billy to answer, and also I'm just curious, like the Sinai Bible, is that was that where was that
I
piece
found the
discovered?
text where I was referencing. Actually, I was misquoted. I misquoted there. It's the Gospel of Barnabas.
Okay, yeah. Well, so that's good. So let's deal with that too, because I've actually worked with. There are two manuscripts of the Gospel of Barnabas. The Gospel of Barnabas is a really interesting document because it is a known forgery, and so that's why.
Okay, the reason I stopped it here is because what's going on here was Billy Carson was not prepared for this. Right? If you watch his videos, he talks about not knowing what this was going to be about exactly. Any good debate, and if you're going to have a debate, regardless if he's talked about these things in the past or he bases um, uh, all of his writings and everything else, or all of his proof on these writings, which now we're getting to learn is a forgery as well. If we're learning that, it makes him look obviously like he doesn't know what he's talking about, or he's using very poor, insubstantial information. Okay, and I guess that's coming from this gentleman, Wesley Huff, who's, I guess, a scholar in this department, or a linguist, I guess they say, right? So he studies the language of ancient Coptic Greek, and I'm not sure if he mentioned that he studied any Hebrew or Aramaic. So the reason I bring that up as well is that they've been finding manuscripts. Most recently, they found an ancient manuscript, much older than a lot of these texts that they have here, that talks about Christ having a wife. As a matter of fact, if you go into the ancient Apocrypha and some of the Gnostic texts, they have a lot of information just like this as well. So the other part that I wanted to say was that when the other gentleman in the blue, the host with the blue jacket on, I don't know what his name is, I really don't know who he is, but I guess he was speaking earlier, and he was talking about the fact that that in 350 AD or somewhere around there, that some of the books were written, and that they had the apostles that were documenting all the different experiences of Christ. But then again, if you look at that, we could go, I'm going to give you an example. We can go 350 years in the future from this day forward. Somebody in the future will find a copy or many copies of Marvel comic group of people called the Avengers. Now, I know it sounds funny, okay? But they'll, across the board, because this thing's now been around the world, right? It's been around the world in television. It's been around the world in comic books, first of all. And, most likely the only thing to survive won't be anything digital, in 350 years. If, let's say, if a catastrophe or something happens, let's add that in there. And they find, let's say, written form of this. People will use the idea, which Wesley's about to do, is that you're going to have written forms of information that all document the same thing. And I'm using that for a reason, because the Bible itself, if you have what they call the apostles writing all this information in the past, it's just as insubstantial as anything that Billy Carson or anyone else has to say. And the other thing I'm going to point out is that Billy Carson is not the only one to say this. everyone in Ancient Aliens, I don't know all of the people's names in Ancient Aliens, but a lot of the hosts that are there, and tons of people, like one of the main people that talk about this stuff is like David Icke. You have people like David Icke that believe in reptilians. How come none of these people went after these guys, Ancient Aliens or David Icke or any of these people that talk about aliens and kind of come down on the Bible? How come they didn't go after these guys? Why are they choosing specifically Billy Carson? But there's a reason for that, and I'm not going to say it now. I'm going to have to make another video when this stuff is not so hot and people won't get too excited and get too upset. But let's look at this a little bit further. But I had to state my case here before we move forward. So keep that in mind, guys. 350 years from now, across the world, if they found copies of Marvel, yeah, they would have proof that these Avengers lived here somehow, and this was the remnants of these Avengers. But we know in our time that was just fictitious. It was created by, a bunch of artists. And, 350 years from now, nobody knows if that would be the case. It could be the next Bible in the future. Who knows? But let's go forward here.
I think it's important to get to these sources. So at the very start of the Gospel of Barnabas, which we only have 2 copies of, one is in Italian and one is in Spanish, we see right off the bat that the Gospel of Barnabas, not to be confused with either the Epistle of Barnabas or the Acts of Barnabas, which are 2 apocryphal documents from the 2nd century, but the Gospel of Barnabas in particular, we know it's a forgery because it does things like in chapter 92, it says that Jesus spent 40 days on Mount Sinai, and then he came to the Jordan River and he walked to Jerusalem. But Mount Sinai is more than a week's journey away from Jerusalem, and neither Mount Sinai nor Jerusalem are close to the Jordan River. So never mind there not being a route from the Jordan River to around Mount Sinai or going to Jerusalem. But there are internal problems with the Gospel of Barnabas, which
Okay, before he goes any further, I just want to state clearly here, and you guys listen very closely so you don't miss this. He said they're having a hard time and being skeptical about the Mount Sinai location and Christ being in these certain areas because it's a week's worth of travel. But they don't have any problem believing that he walked on water. Okay, I want you to put that into clear perspective. Look, I'm not saying this to be funny, but if these guys believe that this same man couldn't make that journey in a week, but yet they believe he walked on water and then he made food out of nothing, and then he brought the dead back to life, but they have a problem believing that he could travel distances to Mount Sinai, a week's journey in maybe a moment or a day. Not to be funny here, okay? In India, we have in our lineage in yoga gurus that are being seen in more than one place at the same time. These have been corroborated by multiple people during these events when they have happened. So you're telling me that the same guy that they talk about that basically raised the dead, healed all these people from these sicknesses, walked on water, did all these miraculous things, couldn't make it to Mount Sinai. That's the only thing so this kind of takes away the credibility of their belief in Christ, because they're denying the fact that he could cover that distance in a shorter period of time than a week. So it doesn't make any sense, and what he's saying shouldn't be taken seriously, because he kind of right now is putting his foot in his own mouth, and I'm saying that in a nice way. Okay, I'm not being mean here. Okay, so let's look further and see what else they have to say.
indicate that it shows no actual indication of evidence of coming from or even having knowledge of first century Jewish understanding. It actually says Jesus is the Christ, but not the Messiah, which indicates that whoever the author is, he didn't know that those were the same words. And I think a bigger problem is that the Gospel of Barnabas actually paraphrases Dante's Inferno, which was written in 1314. So there's a lot of internal evidences that disqualify the Gospel of Barnabas, never mind the fact that we don't have any evidence of it prior to the 14th century. and none in any other language other than Middle Age Italian Italian and Spanish. But the internal content of the Gospel of Barnabas disqualifies it from being ancient. And then the fact that it's doing things like paraphrasing Dante, or it also refers to a rule of the time of Jubilee, which was changed in the Middle Ages from what it was in the biblical year of Jubilee. And it goes with the Middle Ages concept, not the ancient concept. So I think what I'm getting at is, so I'm a historian.
Yep.
And I deal with sources. So when I'm looking at sources, I want to make sure that I have a methodology by which I approach any type of source. So if there is something that denies the crucifixion, I want to make sure that I'm analyzing it and that the methodology by which I analyze it actually reveals that the content can be accurately tied to the event. So if we're talking about, say, Codex Sinaiticus, that's in the 4th century. Now that is, I would agree with you, Billy, our oldest copy of the Bible in the sense of cover to cover, Genesis to Revelation copy of the Bible.
Right.
The problem is that we have individual copies of all 4 Gospels going back hundreds of years before Codex Sinaiticus. So I have a facsimile behind me of P66. This is a late 2nd century copy of the Gospel of John. I work with this particular manuscript. I can just show the screen right here. This is an almost complete copy of the Gospel of John, and it has the crucifixion.
By any chance?
Yeah, so papyrus is just the what it's made out of. So
I got that from ChatGPT, by the way.
Yeah,
Sorry,
so
guys, I'm just
I can actually.
smart for a second.
I have that papyrus at home.
Oh, that's
Yeah, so I'll show you this. So the documents you actually see on my bookshelf behind me. Documents you actually see on my bookshelf behind me are facsimile papyri that I've made. So when I was in Egypt last summer, I went and I got made for me some papyrus sheets. And so I take these papyrus sheets, which are made from the papyrus plant. And then when I go and I look at actual manuscripts, so I was at the University of Philadelphia last summer, and I went and I saw a document called P1, which is a 3rd century fragment of the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew. And so what I did is I sat down with that original and I produced a facsimile. So I copied the text. First of all, I cut it out with an X-Acto knife in not the original 3rd century one on my papyrus. I cut out with an X-Acto knife this guy, and then I copied the text transcriptionally on the front and the back. So papyrus is just simply, it's what it's made out of.
Yeah.
And so there's categorizing systems, and the standard one is called the Gregory Allende categorizing system. And so sometimes you'll see when manuscripts are mentioned, they'll have a GA and then a number behind it. If it's made of papyrus, you simply abbreviate the word papyrus to P, and then you have the numbering system. Mm-hmm. So P66, what I showed you earlier, that's this on the categorizing system. It's the 66th manuscript that was put into the system. It's from the Gospel of John. I also have, P46 and P47 on my shelf, which includes all 4 Gospels. And
so again, guys, let me point something out here to you. He's talking about this because he mentioned he's a scholar or a historian, right? And he's a linguist. That has no bearing on the fact that those papyri that he has there are written by someone who's really unknown, only in the fact of they only have a few writings of who these people are, but they have no real way of corroborating who these are just people that randomly wrote down stuff after Christ passed away. Okay? So we don't know for a fact that what they're saying is true. Nobody knows for a fact what they're saying is true. It's just like the same thing 350 years from now. Let's say everything's changed. They've had a war. The world has to start back over. The only thing they have left is the Marvel comics or something like that. And no one knows. They might have the author's name in there and the artist, but no one knows for sure if they're telling a true story or not, because it's 350 years later. And that's what you have to use logic in the same sense. Look, it's great that they have a categorizing system, a methodology. It's great that they have that. The only thing that does is just keeps things in an orderly fashion, in a sequential order. Okay, that's the only thing that does. That they have, it's almost like having protocols. You have to do this first, do this second, do that, and then you have to meet all these other requirements for this to be an established form document that's substantial in some way or another to whatever hypothesis that they're trying to form. That's all they're doing right here. But it in no way is substantiated as a fact. And he's not mentioning that here. It is the word of someone who is really unknown to anyone, and that's all it is. That goes right back to the idea of, who the hell really wrote the Bible? Is there an author behind the Bible? The same thing, you have to ask that question. So if they're looking for credibility, you have none when it comes to the actual written documentation of the Bible. There is no credible substance to it. The only thing is that you have to go on pure faith alone after reading it. He's not mentioning that here at all. But it's so funny how he's trying to use his status, which I find really obnoxious, as a way of kind of indirectly shaming and invalidating, or trying to invalidate and trying to shame Billy Carson here. But if you listen to me closely, I'm going to make a lot of sense to you guys. You just have to listen closely. And don't be fooled by a lot of the language, the semantic language that's that they're using, the play on language that they're actually using here, because people that don't know and they don't research things, they're gonna listen to this and be like, oh, this guy's using big words. Wow, he's a linguist. This has no bearing on anything. Being a linguist doesn't substantiate anything when it comes to a religious ideology. Because Christ himself was a carpenter, right? He wasn't a linguist. He wasn't well read and had any kind of backing in or scholarly status. So this is all a bunch of caca, as far as I'm concerned. I'm saying that I shouldn't say that, right? Because it is pertinent in some ways, but it's still malicious in the way that they're using, and that's my point. And like I told you, as we go further, you're going to see that a lot of the things that they're using, it's just a play on words, man. That's all it is, because they cannot substantiate anything they say, starting from the religion itself, from the Bible. And that goes according to any other religion on the planet as well. I'm not just using the Bible alone. No one can prove anything. So this is why I said that it's just really funny how they're picking on them. Okay, let's go a little bit further.
Acts from the 2nd and 3rd centuries. So the only hesitation I have with what you said, Billy, is that we have single copies of the Gospels that can be dated to the 2nd century that all do have the crucifixion. And so if we're relying on something like the Gospel of Barnabas, which is not just it's not that there's debate about it, it's that it's a known forgery. I mean, no one's referring to the Gospel of Barnabas as anything other than...
If you say it's a known forgery, yes, but I'm going to go with that. Let's talk about the Old Testament a little bit and leading up into the New.
Well, hold on.
Okay, I just want to say something. He's saying that the the Book of Sinai, or whatever the hell it's called, the Codex of Sinai, is a known forgery. But how can you prove the Bible is not a forgery? Who's to say that someone didn't just sit down one day and say, okay, I'm going to write this really great story about Christ, and years later they have tons of followers? Then if some guy wrote the book in Scientology, now they have an entire community of people, guys. That's why I'm telling you, look, for all the Christians that are out there, what Billy Carson is doing is not something wrong. He's actually saying, and there are, if you look at the ancient Sumerian texts, and you see, go back to even to any of the religions around the world, there's beings, and they have a format, an actual template, and you guys seem to miss that point. And I think that, look, I feel bad for Wesley and for the other people that are hardcore Christians, or that believe strongly in what they do, because when you tell them something that has logical science behind it, aside from him being a linguist, use substantial factual evidence of science, and it completely invalidates every religion in the world. And I'm not saying that we should do that, but we should use it not just to try to corroborate each religion, but to find some commonality in between all of them to make some sense out of it. In other words, instead of trying to separate, let's try to incorporate and unify. That's what I'm saying. And doing it this way, what Wesley's doing, is completely trying to invalidate a new idea and a new concept. That's all they're doing. And I don't know what the agenda is here. It's very malicious from what I can see.
Do you mind if I address the gospel of Jesus' wife?
Sure, go ahead.
What was her name?
Yeah,
I'm like trying to write notes like I know what I'm doing, but I'm just curious.
so the gospel of Jesus' wife doesn't actually mention. So oftentimes what happens is that the text of the gospel of Jesus' wife is kind of paralleled with the gospel of Philip, which mentions that that Jesus would kiss Mary Magdalene on the mouth. And so those are kind of used in parallel to kind of for this argument that Jesus was married. So the gospel of Jesus' wife is in the Harvard Library. However, the reason we know it's also not legitimate is because even though the manuscript, the papyrus that it's on, was carbon dated to the 4th century, the text was actually copied from a PDF version of the Gospel of Thomas known as Grandin's Interlinear. And there was a mistake in the Coptic text of Grandin's Interlinear that was copied into the Gospel of Jesus' wife. So we know that this is not a legitimate document, even though the papyrus is ancient, and this happens a lot with forgeries. I have a couple of friends who have actually worked on projects that have revealed forgeries within Dead Sea Scroll manuscripts and within other ancient Christian papyri. But the reason why we know the gospel of Jesus' wife, and that Karen King, who kind of vouched for it and she lost a lot of credibility, unfortunately, for her, and she's admitted that it's a fake as well, was because we can tie it directly to not copying from an ancient text, but actually copying from an online version of the Gospel of Thomas in a PDF form. And the mistake on that PDF form was copied into the text that was borrowed in the phraseology of Jesus' wife. So I just point that out is, once again, with our sourcing, I think we need to make sure that we're going towards not just early sources, but actually credible sources. And unfortunately, neither the Gospel of Barnabas nor the Gospel of Jesus' wife are credible sources in terms of actually, and agreed upon by not just the vast majority of scholarship, but I don't know anybody in the field of papyrology, paleography, historiography, who actually refers to these documents as being legitimate.
That's fair enough. I can respect that. So let's go into the Old Testament a little bit. Predominantly, from my research, I discovered that a lot of information from the Enuma Elish and the 7 Tablets of Creation is a lot of in Genesis, a lot of the creation story that comes into Genesis. Not all of it, but because obviously Genesis is a much smaller version of a much bigger story. But it's literally almost word for word from the Enuma Elish and the 7 Tablets of Creation. The Epic of Atrahasis as well is also there in the Old Testament. Several other tablets as well, Code upon Marabi and a few others, have made it into that text. Sumerian cylinder scrolls that talk about the creation story. Again, the creation story in the Epic of Atrahasis. And so we tend to see this copying of ancient tablets, text, and scriptures, even some papyruses, into the biblical text. Meaning that my point here is that I think a lot of people are saying that this information was written in real time. A lot of people believe that. If you ask the average person, they really believe an earlier date. That's what I have found, that it's made it into the canonized Bible, but they never reference that they got it from any other ancient texts and tablets that have to do with a totally different civilization with totally different religious beliefs.
Have you read the Enuma Elish?
Yeah, I've done lectures.
Do you mind? Sure. Do you mind summarizing the content of the creation account in the Enuma Elish for us?
Sure. The Enuma Elish is a very ancient text discovered in the Library of Ashurbanipal. And the summary of it is that it really gives us an account, which is crazy, an astronomical account of the creation of our solar system. It talks about planets and moons gaining specific orbits around the sun. It talks about a huge planet named Tiamat, 46 times larger than Earth. Earth didn't exist at the time, according to the author of this text, which is pretty interesting. And then there talks about a nemesis of sorts. In the original version, it's called Nibiru, but in a more recent version, still thousands of years old, the name was changed to Marduk. Marduk is in the Jewish American Library, in the biblical text, in the Torah, and so forth. Very popular figure in ancient times in the religious books and texts. Marduk wanted to be the destroyer, so Marduk is the one that during its next orbit towards Tiamat, crashed into Tiamat and destroyed Tiamat. A huge chunk of it swung away, recoalesced, taking the water, land, and organic material, which basically recoalesced as our planet here, Earth. And the rest of it broke up into pieces. Some of it turned into the asteroid belt. Other parts of it were thrown towards the sun, and some were thrown towards the inner Oort cloud, towards the outer edge of the solar system. This planet, or this moonlet that orbited, supposedly a brown dwarf, basing on the description of it, gained a very strange orbit around our sun. And we have the scientific evidence now also to match with NASA's data, where we see that Saturn and I believe Neptune switch places. Uranus is flipped on its side, and that's more evidence that something came through our solar system in ancient times and gravitationally really tugged at planets here and switched up their orbits and even pulled the axis of a planet on its own side, where the equator is now running north and south. So a little bit of modern astrophysics kind of backs up what this ancient text is saying. But the New Militia also then begins to talk about the fact that these beings, it kind of cuts into the fact that these beings, are on Earth and at some point begin to engage mankind. In other words, they didn't create people from scratch, but they engaged the existing hominid and began to utilize us as workers for their workforce. In the Atrahasis epic, you see a much similar story, slightly later date period, but still thousands of years old, the epic of Atrahasis. And we see a very similar story. And we see where the sons of God literally came down to Earth. They came from Mars, according to this text, if you read the translation of the planet Mars and to English. And then they went to battle. They were going to go to battle in South Africa against Enki and Lil and Anu. And they come to terms without going to battle. They argued that they needed women, human women, believe it or not. And they also wanted a workforce. They didn't want to continue to do the labor. They were cleaning out the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, digging canals, building cities on Earth and.
So I know what's going on here. So the difference between Wesley Huff and Billy Carson is that Billy Carson does not have a background in linguistics. He's not a historian. He looks at the type of mind that he has is that he takes things and puts them in pieces and then puts the pieces together, forming some kind of a pattern or story. These are different ways of thinking. Right now, because Wesley has asked the question, summarize it, it's going to be hard for a man that his mind uses this scattered way of thinking to summarize anything. And I know that because it's not just him. There are a lot of other people, that cannot summarize something in a cohesive fashion, but yet they'll understand the entire picture. They may not be able to read it off the way a linguist, or let's say someone who specializes in the English or just language itself or speech, pathology, or any of those things. They would not be able to have the same way of expressing their story or the idea or a summary in that sense. And if you look at a lot of Billy Carson's videos, he pretty much does exactly what he's doing now. That doesn't take away any credibility from him at all. It just shows that the way his mind works, that's all. You ask any other human being on the planet to summarize something and see if they even know what the word summarize means. So, that's like putting a surgeon and a guy that is on YouTube that loves to talk about surgery, on the same platform. And the two of them, one will know quite a bit about the idea of how to go about surgery, but he will not know how to express it the same way that a surgeon does. Do you understand? So it's probably not the greatest way of expressing it, but I can express it another way. A lot of people here in America that I've studied with and worked with in yoga, they were all focusing here in the Western Hemisphere, in the United States, more so on saying that you have to know anatomy. In ancient India, they never taught anatomy. When they taught yoga, it had nothing to do with anatomy. You learned about your body by feeling it through the art of yoga. So that's why I always tell them, I said, if you think that having to have anatomy as a core aspect of yoga, it might help in some ways, but if you think that has anything to do with the actual process of yoga, then go up to any doctor and ask them something about yoga, because they know a lot of anatomy, right? So they should know something. I guarantee you they wouldn't know where to begin. And that's what I'm trying to explain. That expresses my idea better here. So hopefully you'll understand that and not be fooled by the semantics again, and also by the status, because you have to put things in a clear and I want to say fair order. This is completely out of any kind of equality here, and I think it's a shame that they're doing this.
According to the text on Mars, not according to me. And a decision was made by Enki and Anu and Enlil to allow this experiment to happen, where they would take the existing hominid here. They would slay one of the gods, meaning that they would, in my opinion, that doesn't mean that they're going to kill it, but somehow some type of genetic modification or manipulation, in my personal opinion, that's my personal hypothesis. But in the end, it ends up being that human beings are now doing a lot of this labor and worshiping these people as gods, as they, my personal opinion, masqueraded as gods. A lot of stories there, parallel stories that you see in the Bible, even the Tower of Babel incident and many other crazy stories that are in the Bible. You can find a lot of those true stories in the ancient text, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where you can find the true story of Noah. They found the Noah tablet to give him instructions on how to build the ark. It wasn't a big boat. It was a round disc that he built with sections cut up on the inside like a pie. That was discovered about 4 or 5 years ago. I believe it's at the British Museum now. So there's a lot of text that's just been covered and copied over into the biblical text. And I think that, in my personal opinion, a lot of people are just became a cargo cult, worshiping people that were masquerading as gods. I do believe in God, by the way. Let me make this clear. I believe in God. I believe there's a creator of the universe. I believe that the mathematics, the quantum physics, all proves that. The fact that we're here, I believe this universe is imbued with a divine energy and a divine spark that lives inside of all of us. I just don't believe that the God of the Bible is truly the creator of the universe. I don't think that God needs money. I don't think that God needs.
Sure. Do you mind if I just jump in here for a second? Because I think we've kind of gone on from the original question. I appreciate that. I do have a few issues with your summary, although I think I have read the Akkadian version. My Akkadian's not great, but I